Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. My name is Derek Riley, and I'm a BFG teacher here at 9th and O. And today we're continuing our walk through the book of Ruth. So far, we've made it up to the beginning of chapter 4. We've met all of the principal characters of the book, and the widows Naomi and Ruth are back living in Naomi's home of Bethlehem. Once they came back, Ruth had met Boaz, a relative of Naomi's who could be a potential redeemer for Ruth and for the line of their family. So Naomi and Ruth came up with a plan for Ruth to approach Boaz and ask him to be the redeemer. But Boaz then introduced another wrinkle in the plan. There's another relative who's closer than him, someone who has the right to step in as the redeemer first. So that brings us up to the beginning of chapter 4. Here, though, we see that Boaz makes a plan of his own to settle the issue. In verse 1, we see that Boaz goes up to the gate of the city and sits down there. This would have been the place in the city where business is happening, and the place where important people gathered together to make decisions or even to settle disputes. But Boaz places himself there, beside the gate, and waits for this other relative of theirs. It's interesting that in a book where names feature so prominently, that we aren't told this man's name. Instead, he's just called the Redeemer. So Boaz spots the Redeemer walking by the gate and calls him over. Then, as they're all coming by, he gathers 10 more men from the elders of the city and has them sit down. And once he has everyone gathered together, Boaz lays out the situation. He says to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from this country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those who are sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people." But here's the emphasis in verse 4. "If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you've not, tell me that I may know, for there's no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." Until now, we had heard them talking about a redeemer and redemption, but they'd been talking in terms of people, that Boaz would redeem Ruth. Here, though, we get a different sense of the word. Boaz asks this redeemer to redeem the land. These men know the law, or at least they know their traditions, and they know that the land in Israel has been given by God to his people. After the conquest, the land was divided among the people and the tribes, and the land of the tribes was divided into land for clans. So each family was given a piece of land to be their piece of the promised land. It's their inheritance in God's promises. It's their place among God's covenant people. That's why in Leviticus 25, the people are told that they can't sell the land to outsiders. If there's a financial need, if someone is in distress, like Naomi certainly was, they could sell their land, but not in perpetuity, because the land isn't really theirs. It's the Lord's. But if someone is struggling and has to sell the land, a redeemer was supposed to come forward and buy it. That's the most literal sense of redeemer, someone who buys it back. And in this case, they're buying back the land. But they're buying it back just for a short time, because at the next year of Jubilee, that land goes back to its original owner. After all, the land belongs to the Lord, and he has given it to them. This Redeemer knows the situation, and he knows that it's Naomi who's selling the land. He knows that if Naomi is selling her husband's land, then it hasn't passed on to an heir. And if Elimelech doesn't have a closer heir, then this Redeemer will inherit the land. So by redeeming the land, even for a time, he's staking a claim on this property to be his own. So he says, yeah, of course I'll redeem it. But here's where Boaz shows his cards. He says, "The day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in this inheritance." That's too much for the Redeemer, though. He wants to inherit this piece of land and increase his own wealth. But if he has to act in his appropriate role and take Ruth as his wife, then he would have to split his inheritance, including this land, and give a full portion of it to a child who has another person's name. So this man ignores his responsibilities in God's law. He does what's right in his own eyes, and he will not redeem the land. All of this talk of redeeming and buying and relatives and Levitical law is there for a reason. It's there to show us Boaz's faithfulness. This so-called Redeemer has no compassion. He didn't love Ruth and Naomi. He just wanted what was best for himself. But he shows us by contrast what kind of man Boaz was. Boaz loved these women. He cared for them genuinely and selflessly, even if it meant sacrificing part of his own inheritance. He was willing to give it up, because that's what a true redeemer does. He sacrifices himself to buy back what he loves. Boaz's faithfulness to Ruth is a glimpse, a pale image for sure, but an image of what the people should be looking for. We know that from Matthew's genealogy in the New Testament that another redeemer was coming from Boaz's family. Boaz is going to go on and redeem the land and redeem Ruth. But one of his children's children would be the great redeemer, Jesus Christ, who has redeemed the whole world.